I did.
Yeah, it's not even purple.
Where are we today, Bobby? Do you know?
Yeah, we are suffering the last 2 years of DeSantis.
Marco Rubio stays in power. That's
Well,
a strong Republican.
he's got another 2 years to go.
Yeah.
Relatively.
Yeah.
He graduated law school with my daughter,
Really?
who was law review. He said she didn't even know he was in her class. He was that influential until he ran.
Come on, Will. Here he is, right on the dot, 9 o'clock.
Not a bar mitzvah day.
Not today. Oh.
What?
Conservative opinions there today.
Oh, you're leading the minion?
Don't just sit there.
Who's the guest canner?
Ginsburg.
That's a pretty tally.
My grandmother made
She'd be proud of you today. Are you going? I looked at the program. It looks the morning program looks very good. I look forward, Daniel will be there waiting for you. I was telling somebody they couldn't find him they couldn't find him on Instagram. We were in New Orleans, and a friend of ours' granddaughter is very active at Tulane in the anti-Semitism. She wanted to meet him, and she said, "I can't find him on Instagram." I said, "You don't have to. Just go to Google. He's all over Google."
I'm going to New Orleans next weekend.
Really?
To look at Tulane with Ella.
I have to tell my brother-in-law. You bet my brother-in-law is.
I think there's a good chance she's going to go there.
Wow.
We're still waiting to hear from a couple other schools, but right now that's...
You know, that's where Judy Siegel's from.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, do we hear something funny? They live 3 blocks from my brother-in-law, Alan,
Yeah.
and he plays cards with her father.
Seems like a good school for her.
It is a good school.
So we'll see. We're still waiting to hear from
We'll make it. I can't make it happen.
They offered her money, so...
My Loren's first cousin, Daryl, is on the board of trustees.
Okay. Well, she already got in. They offered her money, which is what we were looking for. And
They offered me money to stay away.
I didn't tell my neighbor.
No.
It is. Well,
Well, everybody's kid who goes to Tulane, Alan and Nikki invite over. They have Rosh Hashanah for you.
okay. He's a little lighter in the wallet today.
You know, you should bring a bigger service so you can share with us.
Okay. Good Shabbos.
Shabbat shalom.
My voice is starting to go a little bit.
Well, thank God you don't have to make a living.
No. All right, here we go.
All right.
V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם, אותי לעולם, ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. כי 6 ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם וביום השביעי שבת ויהי נפש שבת ויהי נפש שבת ויהי נפש ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם בורא פרי הגפן Amen. L'chaim.
Enough to wash your mouth.
Okay, blessing for Torah Study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Big morning. We've got 3 minions today. We got the bat mitzvah, we've got the reform minion, we got the conservative minion, we got the orthodox. No, all right.
They walk. They're still walking.
They'll be here. They'll be here. Yeah, Joe. I'm sorry. Oh, Rabbi Cook. Yeah, welcome. Anyone know Rabbi Cook from UM Hillel? It's not that big a deal around here, but his wife is. His wife is a key player in our. If you haven't met his wife, Felicia, she's a big part of our staff, and we're very lucky to have her. So I just want to, if you haven't heard, we have announced that we have a solidarity trip to Israel in June. I'm concerned about people. I'm concerned about filling up that trip, but I want to encourage you to consider it. If you haven't been to Israel since October 7th, it's time to go. Now, as my father said to me yesterday, what if there's a full-scale war? You know, where it breaks out with Hezbollah in the north, and so that it's impossible to go and travel in Israel. So I said, then we won't go. But barring that, it's a very reasonably priced trip, which will have opportunities to visit with the sites of some of the massacres, and it will also be there for Shavuot, and we have planned to celebrate Shavuot at Beit Daniel. So Beit Daniel is the largest Reform synagogue in Israel. It's in Tel Aviv. But it also has a hotel, like a big hostel. And the hotel is filled with people from the south who have been evacuated. So we're going to have a chance to spend the day with them and celebrate Shavuot with them. So this is a wonderful opportunity. So I hope you'll consider going. How many days? 8 days. 8 days. Again, very, very reasonably priced, which is unusual for a Beth Am trip. Yeah.
Why spend less when you can spend more?
I believe it. If it's not, it will be by Monday. But it is on my my Facebook page, and it is the whole itinerary, prices, everything. But I can also text it to you. So if anyone's interested in, just ask me after the class, and I can text you all the information. And I expect you all to sign up. Yeah. I know none of you will, but I expect that you will. All right. Okay. You know what? I hope you've also been following along with all the things that are coming to the hub. We have one of the most famous rabbis and the most famous cantors in the entire country, both coming in the next few weeks. So you have Ozzy Schwartz coming from Park Avenue Synagogue, and we have Sharon Brous, who's coming from Icar in California. These are serious people. Now listen, when you hear the cantor, well, let me just say this. When you hear the rabbi, whenever we bring in a really great rabbi, this is what always happens. You go to it, and you say, right. I mean, it's not, it's not what we even have. It's not. Keep an open mind. All right. All right. Some of this is meant to be fun. Torah portion this week is called Truma. We're up to chapter 25, verse 1. Now, I prepared nothing for this class. Here's why. I gave a Devar Torah earlier this week for the Greater Miami Jewish Federation's Rabbinical Assembly meeting. And then I went to prepare something, and I said, wait a minute. I already have something. So this is, instead of stealing ideas from other rabbis, which is what I usually do, what we're going to look at is an idea that I had. So you can take it or leave it, but I think it will help us understand Truma a little bit. By the way, we're now at the boring Torah portions. We've had all the really exciting ones. We had all Genesis, we had all the narrative. We had Genesis, we had Exodus, but now we've gotten to the midway to later stages of Exodus where we talk about building things and cubits, which isn't as fun as seas that split open, revelation from God, story of Pesach. Now we have cubits. So it's not as fun. So I have to work a little bit harder to make it interesting. All right, so here we go. Norman, chapter 25, verse 1. Everyone have it? Exodus? Okay, here we go.
The Eternal One spoke to Moses, saying, "Tell the Israelite people to bring me gifts. You shall accept gifts from me, from every person whose heart is so moved. And these are the gifts that you shall accept from them: gold, silver, and copper, blue, purple, and crimson yarns, fine linen, goat's hair, tanned ram skins, dolphin skins, and acacia wood, oil for lighting, spices for the anointing oil and for the aromatic incense, lapis lazuli, and other stones for setting, for the ephod and for the breastpiece. And let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them."
Okay. Now, you know what you could get? If you had, back then, if you had this purple wool, you know what you could get for that? You could get like Manhattan. Or wasn't that the deal? It was like Manhattan, you get some wool, I don't know. And for the lapis lazuli, you could have got like, Pennsylvania. These are, I don't know, some of you didn't take history class. What was the deal with Stuyvesant? What do you buy? Didn't he buy in Manhattan for like
$24.
So, yeah, but like in stones and I don't know. He's also a terrible anti-Semite, Stuyvesant. Yimach Shemo. So, all right. We have 2 parts here. So let's take verse 1 and 2 first. God says to Moses, this famous line, right? From everyone whose heart so moves them. That's what I did for the last 4 years. Just ask people for money. Tried to move their hearts. Gave them more of a heart attack than anything else. But, all right. So, what we're looking at in verse 2 is an optional, it's not the mandatory half shekel that everyone has to give as their taxes. This is optional charity here, right? Which is sort of a new invention. You know, how do you think optional charity went in Egypt? You know, who do you think was buying, the Salvation Army? You go into Walmart back then, think people are throwing coins. There's no such thing. Nobody gave anybody any money to anybody. Okay, but then, now so that's a concept. Verse 2 introduces a concept, the concept of nadava, right? Charity, volunteerism. But then verse 3 through 7 is a list of stuff that you could give. Okay? Now, I just want to consider with you the order. How do you think the order is arranged? Now, if we start with gold and work our way down, how do you think the order is arranged?
Most expensive at first.
The most valuable stuff first. Okay. Now, what? Yeah.
In verse 3, it says, these are the gifts you shall accept, and nothing else. I know it doesn't say and nothing else, but it says, these are the gifts you shall accept.
Yeah, because these were the things that were required to build the Mishkan, to build the tabernacle.
Should I repeat it?
They weren't, her question was to the exclusion of anything else, which is a very Talmudic question to ask. But yeah, the answer is only these things because these were the things that were required to build the tabernacle. They didn't need anything else. They weren't at this moment asking for anything else other than the materials they needed to build the tabernacle. So hence you get this list. Paul, can you take the mic behind you?
I have a question that was raised by Rabbi Riskin yesterday, but didn't appear to be answered, and that is on verse 2. It says, "V'yikchu li truma me'et kol ish." Why does it say kach rather than tein? V'yitnu li truma.
Why does it say kach instead of tain?
Yeah,
Why does it take instead of give?
yeah.
Speak to the children of Israel, and they shall take to me. Yeah, it's an interesting question. Rashi says nothing. He only comments on the word li. He doesn't comment on kach.
Can I mention something?
Yeah, Jeff has the answer.
Okay.
Good, because I don't. So.
Okay. Okay. What I think what that meant is that it was telling to the leaders to organize the people and for the leaders to take from the people to give to the tabernacle. And it wasn't of what they, from their heart. It was, and because in order to build the tabernacle, you had to set up a system, an order of not only building, but then keeping it going, almost like building an infrastructure for the temple.
Yeah, that's the answer. I mean, that's pretty much it. That's what all the rabbis agree on. No, actually, Rashi does in his third comment on that verse. He does comment on, "You shall take my portion." I don't know anything other than what Rashi says, which is our rabbis have said. There are three. He gets into a whole bunch of stuff here that is really technical, and will take us away from where I want to go. I wouldn't waste too much time on it now. He does comment, though, on the question of, he does reinforce the idea that this is all that was needed for the Mishkan. When I say Mishkan, I mean the tabernacle. Okay. But I wanted to point out that it seems to go in descending order, starting with the most valuable and going down. Gold, silver, copper. Now, the Midrash has a lot of interesting ideas about why gold, why silver, why copper, and it actually compares those three things to, later on, different empires that Israel is going to survive and outlast. And that also is going in a different direction. But I think we could all generally agree, even if you don't agree, all you need to look at is the Olympics to know that gold's better than silver. Right. And if you want to argue that silver is more valuable than gold, talk to anyone who came in second at the Olympics, and they'll disagree with you. And copper and bronze are pretty similar. And I think anyone would then argue that turquoise wool and purple wool and scarlet wool, they all sound very nice, but you'd rather have gold, silver, or copper. And goat's hair. Goat's hair is and ram skins that are dyed red, and tchashim skins, and wood, and then oil all seem to be less. But then we have a problem with the final one, because you could argue that the final thing on the list, the final item on the list, is actually more valuable than anything. And so then you have a little bit of a problem with this if you're going to argue that this is a descending order. Because the last thing we have are the precious gemstones, the shoham stones and the filling stones that the high priest wore in his breastplate. Okay, so you would think, there's plenty of wood, there's plenty of gold, there's plenty of silver, but there's only a very finite amount of stones that were put in the breastplate, and those seem to be more valuable than even the gold and silver. And if that's the case, why are they listed last? Okay, now we haven't answered any of those questions yet, but does everyone at least understand the question? Okay, Stuart, can you use the mic, please?
In the description,
There you go.
in the description of construction
Yes.
and the order of construction, it was first the home for the tablets. It was first the container for the tablets. And the description goes into its size and build and the lining, the gold. So all of these things seem to follow in the order in which God feels this should be built. And maybe he feels that the home, the secure place where the
Well, we're not just building the ark. We're also building the menorah, which is built later and is made all out of gold.
I got that, but the description continues in terms of the building, and this order of supplies, regardless of what they are, seems to follow the same order as the order of the building.
Nice. Very nice.
And that seems to follow the idea that the home of the tablets is has the highest priority.
Okay, very nice. Very nice.
And that the things that make it look nice later on
Okay,
are
very
less
nice.
important.
All right, Alfred, and then Alfred has an Ivy League shirt on, so this is going to be something very smart, I think.
This portion is also used by...
They don't count Dartmouth as the Ivy League, but okay.
This is used by historians to describe the trade routes of the time, because Petra was the place where they got the aromatic oils, and the lapis lazuli came from Afghanistan. So it's used to describe what the trade routes were like at that time.
Hold on to that idea. Hold on to that. We're going to come back to that. Very, very interesting idea. Very interesting idea. Bill, can we pass you a mic? Bill and then Nancy. And then, can we pass the mic back up? In case you're wondering, the mic is for the people at home so they can hear. There's thousands of people all over the world watching.
Gold is the only material that is actually non-tarnishable. All the other material can get tarnished. The copper, bronze, all those other things. They will tarnish over a period of time, but the gold will not. And also, gold is more malleable. If they want to place it over something, it can be worked, and where the other materials are not as easily worked.
Sounds like you've worked with some gold before.
You want a gold inlay? What do you want?
Nancy?
Well, I was thinking also the fact that in this order of what we need and why we need it, it goes from the exterior and total interaction, but it brings it down in the end, those precious stones, that relates to the Israelites themselves, to the people, to the tribes, and how important we are
Nice.
into God's community. You could have all the exterior stuff, but if you don't have the people, if you don't have the hearts of the people, you have nothing at all.
Really nice. Really nice. 2 more comments, and then we'll. Victor, and then Bobby, and then I've prepared some things to talk about.
I would like, I would like to propose that every item was equally important. And my experience comes from our contractor. We're doing heavy-duty remodeling of the house. And he started getting all the materials into his warehouse, and he will not start until even the last one of the materials was available in his warehouse.
Wow.
Because he knew the project couldn't really
Right.
flow naturally if he didn't do that. And so we waited until the very last thing arrived, and then he started. So I think they needed all the materials
I like that.
to be able to start the construction.
I like that. I like that idea. Bobby?
We should not forget that the people were slaves leaving Egypt. So where did they get these valuable commodities? And we remember back that they got them from the Egyptians.
That's right. Everything, almost everything came from Egypt. We're going to point out what didn't in a moment. Okay, now that we've pointed out and discarded every avenue that I didn't want to go to, no, these are some really good ideas, and I'm going to try to bring some of them back to where we go. One of the things that I might say is the least valuable is the wood, because it's the most common, it's easiest to get. Not in the wilderness, but they took everything with them from Egypt. However, this is very special wood. The acacia wood that's mentioned in verse 5 is not regular wood, it's very special wood. And Rashi tells us what it is. So if you look in verse 5, you have ram skins that are dyed red, and tchashim skins, which could be dolphin skins or some sort of animal skins, and shittim wood, which is sometimes translated as acacia wood. But a good translation of shittim from Hebrew into English would be shittim, because we're not exactly 100% sure. But look what Rashi says here. Edith, do you have a mic over there? Would you mind reading the first Rashi on the sheet?
And shittim wood. But from where did they get this in the wilderness? Rabbi Tanhuma explained it thus. Our father Jacob foresaw by the gift of the Holy Spirit that Israel would once build a tabernacle in the wilderness. He therefore brought cedars to Egypt and planted them there, and bade his children take these with them when they would leave Egypt.
Okay, so there's a lot happening there. First of all, now, if you've ever listened, you probably haven't, but if you ever listened or read some of the, what are called sichot, the discussions of, on a Torah portion of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, what he would do was he would start with Rashi, and then he would explain Rashi and go in different directions. But one of the things that he pointed out here is that Rashi, in his comment, when he quotes the Midrash, gives the name of the rabbi that he's quoting, which he doesn't do that often in his Torah commentary. And the name here is Rabbi Tanhuma. So if he's going to quote the name, there's probably a reason. And the reason is that Tanhuma comes from the same root as Nachama. Anyone know what Nachama means? Consolation. Yeah, consolation. Now, what would consolation have to do with what Jacob did here? So he brought with him, when he came to Egypt, these cedars. And they had like a cedar plantation, and the children of Israel took care of them for the hundreds of years that they were slaves, for the 210 years that they were slaves. Why would taking care of Jacob's cedars offer them consolation? Because it was going to be to build the Mishkan, which they were going to do when they were redeemed, which meant that at some point they were going to be redeemed. And so that's the consolation. But when they left, here it says, so where did this wood come from that they used to build a special beam that was part of the Mishkan? They took this wood with them that Jacob had planted hundreds of years earlier, that they'd been caring for and so forth the whole time they were in Egypt, which means they put a lot of effort into that wood, and wood is heavy, and they had to schlep it. Would you rather have been in charge of schlepping the lumber or the feathers? Or the dolphin skins? So it took a lot of schlepping and a lot of work and a lot of care to bring out the wood, which, when you put that kind of care into it, makes it more valuable. See? So all I'm saying so far is, when I look at the list of the stuff, one of the things that's mentioned in this list is specifically telling us why it's valuable. Now, the thing that you might have said, okay, what's the most valuable? Gold, silver, copper, wood, precious gemstones. And what Rashi's saying is wood. I mean, the one thing that we actually have a comment on of its value is the thing you thought was least valuable, the wood, because of the care and the effort that it took to make it possible to be used in the Mishkan. All right. Clear so far? Okay. Judith? Mike's coming.
It says the wood is acacia wood, and this is, you're saying cedar is the wood that they took care of. So
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't know what the difference is between acacia wood and cedar wood, which is why I translate atzei shittim wood, because I don't know exactly what it was. What I do know is that Rashi is referring to that wood in verse 5 to talk about whatever wood it was that Jacob planted, and now they're bringing out. But yeah, I don't have a great translation for that.
Also, the wood, the value of the wood is because whenever you're building a structure, that the central beam, the whole point of everything they were doing.
It's central, right?
Everything else becomes valueless if they weren't building the tabernacle. And so that is the central point of their whole, what they were doing.
100%. 100%. And when you think about where the wood went as the central beam, then it makes all the more sense. Okay, now, we pointed out, if there's one other thing that I wonder where it came from, that didn't come from Egypt, it might be the verse 7. So if I look at verse 7, Avnei Shoham, Va'avnei Miluim, La'ephod u'lechoshet. And there are a lot of Hebrew words here that I don't know how to translate. So, Avnei Shoham. Avnei I can translate. Even means stone. Right? But I think there's a more powerful meaning in the word stone. We place stones on graves. One of the ideas why is because even is the word for stone, and even can also be an acronym. So why place a stone of all things on a matzeva, on a a marker, tombstone? So there are three letters: Aleph, Bet, Nun. Even. Aleph, they say, could stand for Abba or Ima. You know what that means? Mother and father. The Bet can stand for Ben or Bat, son or daughter. And the Nun could stand for Neched or Nechda, grandson or granddaughter. And so the stone represents from generation to generation. Right? It's like a nice idea. I think that's, there are a lot of different reasons for the custom of putting a stone. Whenever there are a lot of different reasons for a custom, you know what that means? We don't know. We don't know why we do. Right. So you take the one that fits best with the sermon that you're giving. That's all right. Now, Shoham, Rashi says, Shoham means Shoham. Two were needed there to meet the requirements of the ephod, which is mentioned later on in Parshat Tetzaveh, which we'll get to. Miluim means filling. It can also mean reserves. The armies, the soldiers that are fighting in Gaza now, a lot of them are serving their miluim, which means reserve duty. Right? Miluim, they're filling in. Because they make indented settings for them in gold, and they put the stone there to fill the indentation. They're called filling stones, and the place of the setting is called a frame. Okay, so that's what Rashi says. And then the ephod, or ephod in Hebrew, and choshen, the stones, the shoham stones and the ephod stones and the filling stones for the choshen, and they're also described later, they are the types of ornaments for the high priest. So what we can say from that is there are these special stones that you could maybe in English call lapis lazuli, I guess some people. I once had a kid with a bizarre sense of humor who had this Torah portion, and as a gift, instead of giving me golf balls, which is what I preferred back in those days when I played golf, he got me cufflinks of colors of filling stones that he thought looked like lapis lazuli. Now, hold on, I wanted to say a few more minutes about golf. But you're right, we probably don't need it. Let's just move on. Can we pass the mic to Miller? There it is. We're getting good at this. No rush. Phil's time.
Rabbi, I was just stuck with the question that you hadn't brought up yet, that the lapis lazuli was mentioned in the Garden of Eden.
Okay, so
and how it, okay.
Now you ask a good question. This is what I wanted to get to. So the question is, where did these gemstones come from? Now, Alfred correctly pointed out that they came from Afghanistan. And the Taliban is now looking for them wherever they can find them to blow them up. No, all right, that's a joke. Don't they blow up? All right, whatever. Yimach Shemam. Okay. So the Midrash has a different explanation of where these stones came from. And this is beautiful. Now remember what I pointed out to begin. If gold, silver, copper are the most valuable things and they're at the front, and we're going to say that the list seems to be in order of starting with the most valuable and then descending down, how come the precious stones, which you would think would be towards the top or at the very top, are actually all the way at the bottom? And here's what the Or HaChaim says. And he's quoting the Talmud, which we'll look at in a second. Look what the Or HaChaim says. Or HaChaim, 1700s from Morocco, who made Aliyah in the last 2 years of his life, and the synagogue. There's amazing stories about the Or HaChaim, some of which you might be able to read in my next novel. Now, here, since you didn't read the first one, I'm coming out with another one. So, since you didn't read the first, okay, some of you did. Most people in the world didn't. All right. Moreover, look what he said. This is an amazing idea. Moreover, there is an opinion cited in Tractate Yoma of the Talmud on page 75a, according to which these gemstones originated, look at this, not in Afghanistan, but in the celestial spheres, and their attainment did not represent an effort on the part of their owners, nor did their being give away represent a loss to those who donated them, inasmuch as they had never toiled in order to acquire them. Which means to say that the wood was really hard because Jacob had to plant it 200 years earlier, and then they had to tend it for hundreds of years, and then they had to schlep it, and it was super heavy. But the gemstones, they just caught them from the sky. and put them in their pockets, and that was it, and it was easy. And a stone's a lot easier to schlep around than a big beam of wood. Now, where does the Or Chaim get that from? The Talmud. Look what the Talmud says, the next source. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani said that Rabbi Yonatan said, they brought donations from that which fell every morning with the manna. This teaches that pearls and precious stones fell for the Israelites with the manna. Do you ever, like, you're at a restaurant and there's like a little pebble in your food, or something? This happened to me once at the King David Hotel. The most unbelievable thing. I was eating it. This is when I was a student too. Well, I actually had a lot more money when I was a student, because when I was a student, I was funded by my parents. So I went to the King David for lunch one day, and I'm eating out back on the famous porch, the Paul Newman, and there was a piece of glass in my pasta. It was unbelievable. So I said to the waiter, it's a little crunchy, and we got a free dessert. So here they are, they're eating their bowls of manna, and what do they find? Pearls and precious stones. It states the rulers, the Nesi'im, brought the onyx or shoham stones. Atana means one of the rabbis from the Mishnaic period taught, that the word Nesi'im means actual clouds brought them. As it's stated, as clouds and wind without rain, so is he that boasts himself. Okay, we don't need this so much. But we learn from this that the precious stones fell from the clouds with the manna. And the princes of each tribe, the Nesi'im, this is what their contribution was. But what God was essentially saying by putting them last is, big deal. You didn't earn them. You didn't take care of them for 200 years. You can put them in your pocket. They're not easy to schlep around. And your fancy gift of stones doesn't mean nearly as much to me as the people who schlepped the wood, even though if I were in a store, these stones would go for millions of dollars and this wood would go for a few bucks. To me, the wood is worth more because it has more effort put into the donation. And that's the way it's listed. Pretty amazing, right? Okay, so now, this was just an idea that I had, because when I'm looking at the list and I noticed that the effort is described by the rabbis in two of the things, one the wood and one the stones, and I said to myself, well, maybe I should compare those two and see, why does God list one higher? Why does God prefer one more than the other? Which means to say, God's, if you have someone who's worth $1 billion and they give $100,000 to, whatever, the study of cancer, and then you have someone who's worth $100,000 and they give $2,000 to the same cause, God might say, wow, that's more of a donation, because you're going to miss that a lot more than that guy. And so, what we're saying is, the way we started before we got to the list in verse 1 and 2 is, whosever heart so moves them. And so then the list comes and says, how do I measure whose heart moves them how much? And then I found these two things. And I said, okay, well, maybe it doesn't matter how much you give or what you give, but what it means to you. Does everyone see that? Okay, we're starting to get to, that's one idea that I had, but I want to go a little bit deeper. Rabbeinu Bachya, it's an amazing app you can get. Whenever anyone says your favorite rabbi, like someone, Rabbeinu Bachya, it goes off. Okay, who's got a mic? Anyone? Would you mind reading the Rabbeinu Bachya, a Kabbalistic approach? The last source on the first side?
A Kabbalistic approach, the words
Vaikhuli truma, and you shall take from me a contribution.
may be understood as an invitation for the
Knesset Yisrael, the people of Israel.
the spiritual concept of the Jewish nation to gather around God. They are to be considered as a gift to God collectively. It is the
Knesset Yisrael, the people of Israel.
which is referred to by the word
Zot in verse 3.
in verse 3. This is why the Torah wrote here,
You can just skip the Hebrew. We don't need it.
and this is the gift you are to take from them. The word
Zot.
is also featured in Genesis 49:28, where I have explained this in detail. We have a verse in Psalms 118:23
Right. Just skip the Hebrew.
is from Hashem, which makes a similar point. The reason for the wording, let them make for me, is that it is an invitation to bring together the celestial forces with those on earth and vice versa, seeing that in all such matters the driving force is the heart and the mind. The Torah states that in order to attain such an objective, it is necessary for every such person to be motivated by his heart.
Okay, so what is Rabbeinu Bachya talking about? This actually, you could use this to respond to Rabbi Riskin maybe. What is Vaikhu? Yeah?
I think a line that I read in there was similar to what I was thinking, that the gemstones fell from heaven,
Yes.
right? So
Maybe.
those are gifts from God. That's from God. And the toil and labor that the humankind dealt with is the wood. So then you bring the two things together, and maybe it was the humility of God put it last, because that's his gift, and it is the most valuable, we all know it.
Okay.
But it came last because he gave it.
Very
And
good. Okay, so we're on the right track. You're on the right track. Here's what I think Rabbeinu Bachya is trying to say. I originally broke up we only looked at 7 verses. The first 2 and then the next 5. So the first 2 talk about this idea of whosever heart so moves them. And the next 5 then talk about physical things that you could give. So there's a combination here between the spirit, the celestial, and the physical. What's the physical? Verses 3 through 7, the stuff that you're going to give. What's the spiritual? The heart part. Anyone ever read, I don't know if you've ever studied this, but Kabbalah is really hard to understand. There are very few people in the world who understand Kabbalah. People don't really even study Kabbalah. They study explanations of Kabbalah, which means you might study the writings of Isaac Luria, or you might study Tanya. The Chabad is really into Tanya, which were the explanation of Talmud of the grandfather of the Rebbe. And in there, he explains that the soul is housed in the heart. What is soul? Soul is when you're born, God breathes into you. And so every one of us, every human being in the world, not just Jews, all human beings have in them a little bit of the breath of God. That's called soul. Neshama, right? Neshama, which is soul, linshom means to breathe. Neshama is breath. So we each have a little bit of breath of God, which is housed in the heart. Why is it housed in the heart? Because that pumps it through the whole body. That's how we get our soul pumping through the whole. You could take it or leave it, but that's a Kabbalistic idea that's explained by the Tanya. Okay. So what you give to the Mishkan, the physical stuff, that's the earthly stuff. But the motivation that you have to give it comes from the soul, comes from inside of you, and that's a combination of the celestial forces with what Maimonides would have called the sublunar world, right? The physical world. Clear so far? Okay. Now, all of this. Okay, so everything that we're going to, to put. Everything that we're by the way, this is one of the things that makes, when I look at I wasn't here when they built this building. But the other two buildings, when I look out at them, what do you see? Every single penny of those two buildings came from members of this congregation. There were no grants. There were no foundations. There was nothing. Nobody gave us anything. We asked. They said no. So we asked you instead. You said yes, and now we have those buildings. But when you look at those buildings, they were put up by people whose hearts so moved them. As opposed to, you go look at a bank or something. There's nothing spiritual about it. It's there to make money, right? No offense to bankers. Maybe of great spirit. I don't know. Whatever. Any building you could think of. But when a building's made up just by contributions of people who are interested in spirit, then you see it. So when you looked at the Mishkan, the other thing about it was the Mishkan was miraculous. So if you would take these things, the beam of wood, for example, and this beam of wood that ran through the whole Mishkan, it didn't fit. Like if you look at the descriptions of the cubits and how everything's supposed to fit, the Talmud tells you it didn't fit. But a miracle happened and God made it fit. Everything just worked out the way it was supposed to, even if the dimensions didn't work out. And there were miracles to it. Later in this Torah portion, we mentioned the kruvim, right, which are the cherubs. I think kruv is also cabbage in Hebrew. Kruv, cabbage, kruv, yeah. But kruvim's also. You're not going to get that in too many places. Our kruv is also the cherubs. The cherubs were magical. They moved around. They did stuff. What? Oh yeah, I know. But the Midrash might say there's something to it. Sometimes the Midrash plays on words with letters. The cherubs moved. If you just took that gold and put it to the side, it wouldn't do anything miraculous. But if you took that gold and you built it in the way that the Torah said, and you put it on top, and everything fit the way it was supposed to, and then Moses walked into the Holy of Holies, they start moving. The magic would happen. So in other words, individually, these things are just things, but the sum of their parts turns into something much more spiritual, is what I'm trying to say. Okay. Now, essentially what I'm also trying to do is make the point that the first two verses here seem more spiritual. The heart so moves you. What happens in the heart? That's where the soul is. None of this happens unless people feel that spirit to get up and do something. But the next 5 verses are just, all right, but if you want to do that, let's talk tachlis. I need the gold, I need the silver, I need the skins, I need the stones, I need the wood, I need the oil. And that sounds more just like business and commerce. And so we're combining the two things here to make something special happen. So I heard this idea from a rabbi on TikTok. I was just, scrolling through. And in between my algorithm of golf courses and puppies, occasionally I get a rabbi teaching something. And this rabbi said something that I thought, oh my gosh, this is one of the most profound things I've heard in a long time, and fits in perfect with what I was thinking about this week's Torah portion. So here's what I wanted to share with you, and you'll see if you agree. He didn't connect this to this week's Torah portion, but when I heard it, I thought, oh my goodness, this connects really beautifully to this week's Torah portion. So here's what he said, and here's what I think. He said, he was talking about tragedy. I don't know why. But that was because it was a TikTok. I only had him for 2 seconds. But for whatever reason, that's what they were talking about. And he said, the human mind can't fathom tragedy. Sometimes. Sometimes something happens that's so awful that you can't make sense of it. Which is actually what the Lubavitcher Rebbe said about the Holocaust. It's actually why the Holocaust is called the Holocaust. Why the Holocaust is called the Shoah. You know the word Shoah? Shoah is a biblical word. and what it means in the Bible, according to Maimonides, what that word means. And he wrote this, 900 years ago. He means it's something that's burning, and when you look at it, you think you understand it, but the closer you get and the closer you look at it, you realize you can't understand it. That's Shoah. So you could be an expert in the Holocaust. You could have a PhD in the Holocaust. I knew a woman who was the world's expert on the Holocaust. She was the world's expert. She was one of my good friends when I lived in Charlotte, North Carolina. She survived being in Auschwitz for 3 years. And then she came to America and got a PhD in the Holocaust. Nobody knew the Holocaust as well as she did. She knew every single thing that ever happened everywhere, and she was a professor of Holocaust studies, and she lived it. So there's actually a story of her life. She wrote a book, and the story of her life is on Amazon. If you watch the documentary they made about her, you can actually watch it on her. Her name is Susan Cherniak Spatz. May she rest in peace. But anyway, you could think you understand it, but you don't. Okay, so something could be so horrible that the human mind, you just can't fathom it. And the Jewish people know more about this probably within our history than anybody, but we always go on. And what's amazing is people are just expected sometimes to go on. So there's a phrase called, tell me if you've ever heard this before, Achron l'shibud reshit l'geula, which means the last of the generation of enslavement and the first of the generation of redemption, which means Holocaust survivors who survived and went to Israel. They were the last of the enslaved and the first of the redeemed. That's what they called themselves. But how do you go in your mind from 1945 to 1948? How do you go in your mind from losing every single person you've ever known, your entire family, and being taken to a different world with a different language and a different people and be expected to just adapt and go on and, start a new family? How do we do this? How do we go as Jews from October 7th to October 8th? Well, we have no choice. We have to. But how? Because the tragedy is so hard to fathom. So here's what this rabbi said. He said, tragedy sometimes is so hard for the mind to fathom that we have to go deeper than the mind. And he said, what's deeper than the mind? The spirit, the soul. What's deeper than the mind, the soul? So these Jewish people have been slaves for 210 years. Their parents died as slaves. Their kids were raised as slaves. Their grandparents died as slaves. That's all they've ever known. And now they're expected, with no education, no hopes for the future all their life. All of a sudden they're redeemed, and they go from this primitive slave experience to being expected to understand revelation and seeing God. And they go from the worst possible existence to seeing God. And you know what they say? It's too much. We can't do it. We can't do it. It is too much to bear. But eventually they go on. And the Jewish people go on. So what happens is, and I think this is the key to survival of the Jewish people, is every time we've had to deal with tragedy and the mind couldn't deal with it, we've found a way to dig deeper and go beyond the mind to the soul and to the spirit. And that's what propels us forward. Now, where do I get this from? Look at the back page. I bet you've heard this before. The book of Zechariah. Not by might and not by power, but by spirit alone, Ruah, shall we all, right? You ever heard that before? What is it? What is that? That's Zechariah 4:6, right? Not by might, not by power, but by my spirit. And when the Jewish people were slaves, in Babylonia. And Zechariah was trying to urge them that the Persians are going to come and conquer the Babylonians and bring us back to Israel, and we're going to rebuild the second temple. They said, I don't see it. You know, we're slaves. And he said, your mind can't fathom it. It's not going to happen by your mind. It's not going to happen by might. It's not going to happen by power. If you keep relying on that, you're never going to get anywhere. But if you're able to dig deeper than the mind and recognize as Jews that the mind's up here, but the soul is in the heart, and if you're willing to tap into that, then you can do it. And by the way, time after time, generation after generation, we've overcome tragedy that no other nation would ever even be able to fathom, only to go on and do even greater things because we've been guided by the Spirit. So we left Egypt this week, and the very first thing we did was take all the valuables that we took from Egypt and donate them for spiritual causes. We left Israel and went to Babylonia. We came back with all the money that Esther gave the Jewish people and used it to rebuild the second temple. We left Europe and went to Israel, only to go back and build the state of Israel, something more spiritual than the world has ever known. Because we as a Jewish people know that we don't just rely on our minds. We have a secret weapon, which is Zechariah 4:6. Not by might, not by power, but by Spirit alone. Okay. All right, Shabbat Shalom.
But they all, acacia also have these thorns about this long, and if you get near one, yeah.
Didn't you feel like that when you came back from Israel? I felt like, how do the people go on? It's almost like if they succumb to the evil that exists in the world, they would never get out of bed. They just compartmentalize it and say, you know, this is our spirit that we're going to keep alive. Because have you ever moved back to the South? Have you ever lived in the country? Shocking. So. But I think that's why the world take what happened there and extrapolate it, because it's admitting that there's such evil in the world that it could happen all over. And so the world wants to say it's Israel's fault, like it's because they did this and they did that and whatever. But I think it's really that the world doesn't acknowledge it because it's hard to wrap your head around the fact that there's such pure evil in the world. But again, it's like people can't go there. They want to say it's because of this and it's because of land and it's because of whatever.